Welcome to today's webinar, Meaningfully Engaging Youth in Evaluation. My name is Trisha Islam, and I'm a manager of cities for the Communities Building Youth Futures Initiative. I would like to start by inviting us to ground our virtual space and reflect on the history of our physical land. I am currently a settler in Takaranto, colonially known as Toronto. This area has been and continues to be the traditional land of many Indigenous peoples, including the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, who are the current holders of Treaty 13. This area is a subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, and this is an agreement to share and care for the Great Lakes region. Today, this land is still home to many Inuit, Métis, and First Nations. Reconciliation is a process, and it takes time. My hope for today is that we can learn how to build relationships with youth as evaluation partners so that we can also unlearn harmful practices and replace them with better, respectful ways of working with our Indigenous youth and communities. I invite everyone who has joined this webinar to consider the traditional territory and ancestral homeland of Indigenous peoples from where you are calling in from and share it in the chat box. While you are doing that, and for those who are curious, Communities Building Youth Futures, CBYF for short, is a 5-year initiative funded by Employment and Social Development Canada. We work with 13 communities across Canada to build education, training, and employment pathways to success with, for, and by youth. To follow our journey and learn how you too can create meaningful opportunities with youth, please sign up for the CBYF newsletter, which we will post in the chat box. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Pamela Tadelbaum. Pamela is a consulting director of Tamarack's Evaluating Impact Practice area. She is passionate about supporting and facilitating an interplay of learning and evaluation that creates transformative experiences aimed at developing healthy, equitable, gender-responsive, and rights-based communities. Over to you, Pamela.
Thank you very much, Trisha. And I want to just say a very big welcome to our guests today. We have with us Corliss Bean. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Recreation and Leisure Studies at Brock University. Her research involves working with community organizations at local and national levels to develop, implement, and evaluate programming with the goal of fostering youth psychosocial development. Corliss is also a member of the academic network at YouthREX, where she works to make research evidence and evaluation relevant and accessible to the Ontario grassroots youth sector. And as well with us today, we are also very fortunate to have Marika Warner, who's the Director of Research and Evaluation, and Brian Heel, who's the Manager of Research and Evaluation at the MLSE LaunchPad. It's a 42,000 square foot sports for development facility in downtown Toronto. It was built and supported by MLSE Foundation to advance positive developmental outcomes for youth facing barriers aged 6 to 29. Welcome to all three of you. It's really nice to have you here. How are you today?
We're doing great. Thanks for having us.
Awesome.
Excited to be here. Thank you.
Indeed. Thanks, everyone. So before we begin, I'd like to just start with a bit of an overview of the process today. We are looking at the next hour with a really exciting presentation for about 35 to 40 minutes by our guest speakers. And that will be followed with a Q&A of about 10 to 15 minutes, depending, and then a few announcements before we check off the call today. So I want to just actually invite you. I'm interested, as we go through the webinar, please feel free to write questions in the question and answer space available to you. You can get to that at the bottom of your screen. There's a Q&A button, or through the chat box. You're welcome to share your comments with us as well. So before we begin, we can go to, we're talking about youth engaged evaluation practices. And it's interesting because more and more youth are being invited to engage in different processes, from program evaluation to facilitation and directing and developing programs. And there's really an interest and trend in including youth in community development programs and social development, and just really programs that are focused on their own well-being and ensuring their own well-being. So we want to really find out what really is the value of engaging youth in evaluation process. And I think that this is a really important question that a lot of people are interested in. And as well, maybe we can also discuss whether, what are those unique factors that we should be considering if we're part of the youth sector on how to do this effectively and to do it well and ethically as well. I'll pass it over to you, Corliss.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Pamela. Thank you. So before we actually understand the value of engaging youth within the actual evaluation process, we should first understand what youth engagement actually is. So essentially, youth engagement is when young people are seen as valuable partners and actively involved in the planning, the decision-making, and actually carrying out those decisions that affect them personally or that they personally believe are important. So regardless of whether or not you're part of a multi-service organization or like a youth-focused organization, there's value in engaging youth across all aspects of programming. So not only the evaluation process, but thinking about the planning and the implementation phases as well. So as we know, program design and development can inform our program evaluation. So if youth are actually involved in all of these phases, they'll actually be more engaged and more informed when it comes time for evaluation. So specific to engaging youth in the evaluation process, this involves getting young people involved in evaluating not only the programs, but perhaps the initiatives or organizations as a whole that are actually designed to serve them. And as an organization, give some thought personally to yourself of how it is that you are currently engaging youth through various programs and initiatives, whether that's through the planning, the implementation, or the evaluation piece. So Pamela, I might have you just jump backwards actually to the slide before. And maybe this is where I'll focus a little bit more on your question on those unique factors that we should maybe consider as part of being in the youth sector. So youth engaged evaluation practices, including that co-evaluation of programs and services, really helps to strengthen our evaluation practices. And it leads to important benefits, not only for the youth, but also the organization and the systems. And in a couple of slides, I'll dive into some of those important benefits for youth and the organization as a whole. But specifically by encouraging those sustainable evaluation practices in the youth sector, the organization will be better positioned to measure and track their programs, whether or not they're achieving their intended outcomes or impacts. They'll also be able to determine areas of program success and areas for improvement that will then ultimately better meet the needs of those youth that they're actually serving. And then when we think about those pieces of accountability, that we want to make sure that we're able to tell those funders and each other, so other programs in the youth sector, what we're learning and how we can continue to build and improve as a sector as well. So essentially it comes down to evaluating those supports that allows us to do what we already do, but better. So I think this is something that I feel is pretty important to touch on here, because I think oftentimes a common misconception within evaluation is that by merely having youth complete a questionnaire or perhaps engage in an interview as part of evaluation, then we're hearing their voice. And I think as a sector, we need to move beyond this and continue to involve them in different ways through the process. So what's really important to remember is that we want to move beyond seeing youth as subjects to being more intentional and meaningful, engaging youth throughout this entire evaluation process. And we can jump to the next slide and I'll share a continuum of youth engagement. So when we think about youth as more those notion of sources of data, so completing that questionnaire or engaging in an interview of sorts, that's where we look on this continuum as being somewhere virtually none or low engagement. So when we see engagement, it really does fall on that continuum, and we can kind of maybe have a look at that continuum and see where it is that we personally as an organization or in certain programs fall. So as we move from left to right, we're seeing lower levels of engagement on the left, and as we move to that right-hand side, we're seeing higher and higher levels of engagement in different ways that we can do that. So as a field, we generally sit somewhat fairly low in terms of where we use youth as more sources of data. But I think as a field, our goal is to increase this and move across the continuum to more that right-hand side of the continuum and involve youth at greater capacities and in different roles. So as mentioned earlier, youth engagement can can and should take place across all aspects of the evaluation process. So when we think about having youth around the table, they should be around the table for evaluation planning, helping to co-develop evaluation questions, perhaps even working with program staff to develop or even refine a logic model, or selecting evaluation tools.
Thank you very much, Corliss. I think that this is actually a fantastic spectrum to be as a tool for organizations working both in the youth sector and those who are simply trying to engage youth in the programs and that they're running or that they're starting to design and implement. And I think, like, as listeners, probably one of the most important things is trying to understand what are those factors that need to be considered when deciding on the level of youth engagement in evaluation. And we're looking forward maybe for you to share about that now. Thanks.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So maybe I'll narrow it down just to keep it simple to maybe 2 main factors to consider, and while recognizing that there are a lot of different things that come into play. But first, I think often we think quite narrowly about if we're engaging youth within the evaluation process, then we focus on youth. But it's also important to think about the role that adults play in the process of engaging youth and throughout kind of that ongoing process. So ultimately, adults should really aim to be allies of youth throughout this entire process, that they can play a role in recruiting youth to be part of an evaluation team, but also supporting youth throughout that process. So helping build relationships, facilitating a safe space, exposing youth to new opportunities and training so that they actually have capacity to carry out those evaluation roles, and making sure that youth are fully informed about the actual process by providing any sort of background information about the organization or the goals that they're involved in, and ensuring and empowering youth to actually take an active role in evaluating the programs and the services that they're actually designed to serve them. So ultimately, research shows that when youth develop those positive relationships with adults, they feel that they have more voice in the program, and then ultimately perceive that more benefits to program participation. So again, really speaking of that importance of having adults as allies for youth throughout this process. And then I think the second piece that I'll touch on is the importance of making sure that your youth engagement practices are feasible based on the resources that you have available within your organization, thinking about time, human resources, financial resources for both adults and youth that are involved. So start by evaluating the current level of youth leadership that you have within your organization, and figure out how develop a plan as a team on how you can gradually increase these opportunities. So it's important not to try and do too much at once. And obviously we see this continuum and we see, okay, we want to make it to the high or the highest, but maybe that's not feasible for your organization. So making sure that you're taking on different opportunities and engagement that is feasible within your organization. So starting small and perhaps making that a long-term plan to gradually move across that continuum a little bit. And what I will point out too is I know that we talked about sending out some resources to people after the webinar. And I think one resource I'll touch on that's a really great youth engagement toolkit that was created by the Ministry of Children and Family Development in British Columbia. And this toolkit that they created really helps to assess the readiness for youth engagement within an evaluation. So I would definitely encourage you to keep an eye on your inbox for when that comes in. We'll be sure to share that link, and it's a really great tool to just see different ways that you can engage youth through that process. I actually just wanted to share this quote with you because I think it aligns quite well with the focus of today's webinar. And Kim, the author of this quote, is a very well-known and well-established researcher in the field of youth engagement, and specifically does a lot of work in youth-adult partnerships and youth-led evaluations. And I think this quote really speaks to not only the involvement of youth in these processes as a collaboration throughout the entire process, but I also think that it helps to reinforce and eliminate that hierarchy between adults and youth. So we know that this is often a challenge because sometimes adults just aren't accustomed to sharing power with youth. So I think looking at this quote allows us to make space and have conversations around the importance of power sharing, and that notion of co-creation of knowledge and experiences across the evaluation process. So I think what's really exciting is that we will get to see, based on this quote, the notion of some case examples about how we can engage youth through creating their own methods, analyzing that data gathered, and then reporting the findings from Marika and Brian in just a few minutes.
That was really fantastic. Actually, you just touched upon something that I wanted to raise with you just before we moved on to the next slides, was this notion of power and privilege. And maybe it's also an opportunity to think about that as one of the factors when you're starting to think about doing youth engaged evaluation, is maybe doing some self-assessment on the level of readiness that your organization has about with adults who are working with youth, and what their capacity is and readiness to work with youth in a fully participatory manner. So I think that it was great that you brought that up. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And so really now we're going to just move into understanding better how youth engagement is beneficial to youth and the organizations that they'd be working with. So take it away.
Awesome, thank you. So for youth, I think it's important to think about that notion of skill development, and there's a lot of different skills that youth can develop from participating in an evaluation process that are marketable and useful skills, life skills, career building skills that they can apply in their school or at work. Thinking about leadership, communication, project management, thinking about critical thinking or organization skills. Again, thinking about not only what they're learning here, but they can apply that to other areas of their life, which is really important. But it also provides that opportunity for relationship building. And I think that's a really important piece to think about, is that engaging in youth evaluation helps to foster those social competencies and develop and strengthen important relationships, not only with adults, but also with other peers. And they learn to work together as a team, see problems and solutions from different angles and different perspectives. And again, to learn about appreciating differences or different perspectives from others. And then I think a big piece is it helps to increase youth openness to actually learning, taking initiative, being creative, creating a platform to acknowledge different youth skills and expertise. And then ultimately it comes down to, I think for me, a big piece is that notion of self-confidence. So when we put all of this together, we hope that when youth collaborate and contribute, that they recognize that they have these valuable skills and can meaningfully make a difference within their community and their community organizations, which is a big important piece for youth to feel meaningfully engaged in that process. And then maybe I'll flip to, so for the organization, I think a big piece is involving youth in that evaluation doesn't or shouldn't reduce stakeholders' workload. So I think oftentimes it's like, let's just shift the workload from adults or program managers to youth, and that will help get things off my plate. But ultimately it shouldn't. As a staff, you should be working with youth alongside them through the entire process. And again, it's that mutual learning and mutual opportunity for learning from each other. So I think ultimately the benefits then come down to improving the overall quality of the evaluation process, from fostering new perspectives, improving that data collection tools, the processes, creating an additional understanding of the data by involving multiple perspectives. So again, having that adult only focused, whereas if we engage youth who are actually living and breathing the realities of these programs day in and day out, they may provide some really great insights in terms of evaluation questions we hadn't thought of before, or just understanding how we can inform best practices or address those challenges, so that the ultimate goal is to best meet the needs of those participants, right, which are our youth. So, and I think one big piece to acknowledge is around validating the diverse experiences of youth and working towards equalizing that notion of power, right, between adults and youth. And I think that's what you mentioned a little bit before. So I think it's a learning experience for both adults and youth, right? Youth sometimes aren't used to being provided with a voice if we think about different school environments and just different program environments. So this might be a good learning experience for them to kind of narrow that or level that playing field for individuals.
Thanks so much, Corliss. It's really very insightful and really interesting to hear from your experience and your knowledge what these parameters are. And I think one of the questions that Christina had was around examples of programs and organizations working with the high level or highest end of that spectrum. And I think now is a good opportunity, perfectly in line with our webinar plan. Can you guys share the practice of youth engaged evaluation processes of YouthREX and the great examples as well from MLSE LaunchPad?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So maybe I'll start just by giving a quick overview of YouthREX. For those who are less familiar, we're essentially an initiative that aims to make research evidence accessible and relevant to the Ontario grassroots youth sector. And essentially, as part of this commitment, we developed a 3-phase, 7-step approach or a framework for carrying out evaluation. And this includes developing the evaluation plan, carrying it out, and then ultimately learning from and improving our program so that we can best meet the needs of the youth and foster well-being of those participants. So I've been fortunate enough to work with Brian and Marika in a few different capacities. So I'm really excited to maybe use this framework as a guide as we go through some of the different phases and different ways that we've that they have at LaunchPad provided some really neat youth engagement opportunities. So maybe we'll dive into the kind of that first phase, which we refer to as that discovery phase. And this is essentially just understanding our own organizational capacity for undertaking evaluation before we actually take it on. So this is understanding what stakeholders we want to involve, including youth, potentially understanding your program. So either developing or refining a logic model. And again, having youth around the table for those important conversations right from the outset is really, really important. So that's kind of the first phase. So maybe I'll flip it over to Brian and Marika to share some of their insights.
Okay, well, this here is the current iteration of our theory of change, which for MLSE LaunchPad is the overarching theory for everything that we offer. And we're in the middle of a refresh on this theory of change document. So please pardon the somewhat rough appearance here. I thought that it was more important to show you a working draft than a polished product that is a little bit out of date and doesn't really represent the full range of youth engagement here. So you can see the various resources on the far left that are the foundation of what we do and what we offer. And this list has grown and changed over the years. We've only been open since 2017, and we've had quite a lot of evolution in terms of the resources that we consider. Keeping it current, keeping that list current really helps us to understand the recipe for our special sauce, which we used to call our secret sauce, but it's clearly not a secret because here it is in front of your face in a public document. But this is contextual information that we often find missing from reports or papers that we read, but it's really essential for transferability of the learnings. So 2 key resources that we've added here that really speak to youth engagement are organizational expertise, which is defined very comprehensively and which includes the expertise of the youth that we serve, our hourly staff from our community partner organizations, all essential pieces of the puzzle. Youth-centered core values are also a new addition here. And our team defined our core values this past year, youth first, always being our top core value. And these values, along with the theory of change document itself, guide our decision-making at both a strategic and a tactical level. One other example I want to call out here in the resource list is MLSE Scoreboard, and that's the digital platform for youth engagement and evaluation that we've created and that we use for everything from registration to reporting. Our members and our staff have individual accounts. They log in from home and in programs to access information, to complete fun challenges, to complete surveys and provide other feedback, all while earning points in a highly gamified, competitive environment. And we couldn't do what we do without Scoreboard and the youth-focused culture of evaluation that Scoreboard is such a big part of. We sometimes call ourselves a living lab, and we are, but we're one where everyone knows that they're part of the experiment and participates willingly because of the mutual benefits that engaging in the experiment offer on both sides. Some of the benefits that Corliss spoke to. In the next column, you see the who. Just in the next column, the people and the groups that we serve. So the number of age groups that we show here has grown over time to allow us to speak to more specific outcomes at different age ranges. and to explicitly also include our hourly staff who are themselves youth-facing barriers and who the organization has always supported and engaged beyond a typical employee relationship, but who our theory of change previously did not explicitly identify. And then I just want to point out the experiential outcomes, which is a brand new column that we've added for this iteration of our theory of change for 2020 to 2023. And these are preconditions for the achievement of our short-term and long-term outcomes that we've identified and that our youth members have told us are necessary precursors to what comes next in that path.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that, Marika. So we will dive into our second phase of YouthREX's framework for evaluating youth well-being, which is our action phase. So essentially within our action phase, you're carrying out the program evaluation. So you are figuring out what evaluation tools that you want to use, and then collecting evidence, thinking about how you're going to analyze and interpret that, who's going to be around the table, who's actually going to collect that evidence, what tools you are going to use. Is it going to be qualitative? Is it going to be quantitative? Words, numbers, focus groups, questionnaires, arts-based methods. So there's a lot of different ways and a lot of different ways that we can engage you throughout all phases of kind of that action process, especially if we're focused on youth-focused programs where you have youth as maybe co-facilitating a focus group or actually running the focus groups or the interviews, so that that eliminates that barrier, that hierarchy of power, having maybe a program staff or program manager actually collect some of that data. So important things to consider, and we'll turn it over to Marika and Brian again to share some of their insights.
Okay, so this is me again, and I just wanted to check back, Brian, had you anything to add on that previous slide there?
The one other piece that I think we'll get into is just to reaffirm the idea of sort of culture, and just bring it back to what Pamela had sort of mentioned at the start in terms of, how do you decide on sort of what level of engagement to start at, that your program lives at, and across sort of the range of age groups and program types that Marika had mentioned, we probably have about 40 to 50 different kinds of programs and initiatives for youth running in any given week. Some of them are developed and sort of run in-house by us, some in collaboration with other grassroots community partners in the locations we serve. And at any given time, we'll have different programs that are at different places in that spectrum. And I think one of the things that a word you'll kind of hear from us a few times today is the idea of culture. And a practical tip when thinking about sort of where you are or where a program is going to live is, outside of evaluation specifically, do you have an approach and a culture of engaging youth in the life of your organization holistically, broadly? And I think if when we start to plan an evaluation strategy itself, are you starting from sort of a new place, or is it something that's already baked into the experience of who you are and what you do? It makes the lift when you're getting started a little bit easier from the jump.
Great. Thanks, Brian. So what you're seeing now here is the mission measurement model, which really provides a breakdown of how we do evaluation at MLSE LaunchPad. And I'll just run through it quickly. So M for minimal. And this is not about not collecting very much data. We collect a ton of data. It's about utilization of data. So we only collect data that we are going to use, and we only collect the specific data that we need, for example, to inform a decision. So a good example of this is the monthly needs assessment survey that we've been conducting with our members and families since COVID-19 started, where each month we revise, we remove questions that will not directly inform the next steps in our response. And the data that can be used for multiple purposes, those are the gold. Attendance data feeds into our database for use as a KPI, as well as to correlate with demographic variables, to correlate with other outcomes of interest, to inform future program schedules, etc. So, those are the data that you really want to focus on getting accurately and fulsomely. So then the use for I statements, and the use of I statements and how we ask questions, we found really better allows youth to engage and identify with what's being asked, to see themselves in the outcomes, and to see the outcomes in themselves. S for short, our surveys or challenges, we often call them, are short. We keep our data requests frequent and bite-sized to support that youth-friendly culture of evaluation that we've been speaking about. So for example, submitting a daily challenge during COVID lockdown about what physical activity you did that day, instead of completing a standardized physical activity scale after 2 weeks that is 20 questions long and that requires you to recall a week back what you did in 5-minute increments. Strengths-based. So strengths-based language is a must for fostering inclusion. Diagnostic or deficit-based evaluation can really marginalize youth's experience. And frankly, at its best, it's unempowering. At its worst, it's oppressive. IFER involved coaches. So our coaches and other hourly staff play a huge role in our research and evaluation. Members of our advisory committees, part of working groups where evidence-based curriculum and the matching evaluation frameworks are developed, as researchers and as data contributors as well. So in a typical week, a coach collects attendance data, which are data, submit qualitative and quantitative feedback on how youth are engaging in virtual programs. They might complete an observation-based standardized outcome measure on program quality or fundamentals, and also give feedback on the tool that we use to collect those data, submit their own survey responses as a follow-up to a leadership program that they completed back in the summer. So they're quite engaged in a variety of ways. And then finally, over online. So online data collection, more important now than ever. And the fact that we've been collecting data online since 2017 and have gotten to the point pre-COVID where 2/3 of our participants were logging on before a program start date to complete their pre-program survey has allowed us to collect a large volume of very unique data during the lockdown. So for example, tracking physical activity levels, food security, mental health, access to tech resources among our members, and being able to respond immediately and appropriately to the data that we're getting back. And then finally, N for no neutrality. And this is, we just really try to stay away from 5-point or 7-point Likert scales that offer that middle neutral point. And we found that it increases the responsiveness of the data that we collect and the utility of that data as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing that. So our last phase of YouthREX's framework is around the legacy phase. So as part of the legacy phase, we want to learn from our evaluation evidence, both internally and think about how we can communicate that externally. So when we think about who our stakeholders are, internally, we're thinking about maybe program staff, program managers, the youth who actually engage in those programs. And then when we think about more our external stakeholders, those are people like funders and donors, community members, perhaps family members, boards of directors, other community programs that are similar to the ones that you're running. And the important piece here is we want to tailor those messages to ensure that they're relevant to those stakeholders that we are communicating those findings to. So what a funder would be interested in hearing about is likely very different than what a parent or program staff would actually want to learn about. So taking time to actually contextualize and tailor those messages. And then I think a really important piece here is that internal piece, right? That we're actually learning from the evidence and taking time, making space that whether it's ongoing throughout a program, when you're collecting more process related data, or waiting until the end and you have your outcome evaluation data, that you're actually adapting and improving the program based on your evaluation findings. So essentially that's the ultimate goal of carrying out these evaluations, right? Is so that we can make sure that we're meeting the needs of those youth participants. So thinking about how we can engage youth throughout those two processes is really, really, I think, important, and something that also helps with building momentum and building motivation for youth if they kind of have something to really look forward to at the end, that they're actually responsible for presenting some of those evaluation findings to different stakeholders, or engaging in different arts-based or creative ways, presenting at a conference, writing a blog based on their experiences and sharing some of those evaluation findings. I think there's a lot of different ways that we can engage you throughout that process. So again, we'll turn it over to Brian and Marika, and we'll hear some of your examples.
Thanks, Corliss. I really love the YouthREX framework here in terms of just really placing a premium and calling out the importance of internal learning and sharing based on the evidence that you gather and collect, and not just sort of limiting sort of it to sort of the report that kind of goes out. And so I'm going to tell a story of the history of one of our programs at LaunchPad. So every summer since we've been open, we've run an LIT program, Leaders in Training. It's something that we run in a sport for development context. You know, a lot of organizations have and camps have different variations of LIT, leaders in training. You know, it's part of, you know, for a lot of organizations, it's part of, you know, the Canada Summer Jobs for Youth funding stream and everything else. And, you know, contextually, you know, our youth, you know, it's targeted to teenagers. It's intended to, you know, provide, you know, youth development experience and employment experience. And for us, it's a, you know, it's an intensive sort of 8-week experience that mixes some professional development, training, and practical opportunities, typically involving their first jobs as a coach or in leading a program itself. And so I wanted to kind of come back that first year that we ran it. You know, we collected with some of the sort of the mission model and the tips and strategies that Marika mentioned. We collected, you know, a wealth of data. You know, we packaged this sort of great report up, and you know, it kind of highlighted the strengths, what we did well on leadership, on workforce readiness, and all the things that we were really capturing about, as well as sort of a, you know, section on recommendations, insights, lessons learned, things to improve upon for next time. And so when we sort of start shopping that around to sort of our internal stakeholders, you know, for example, sort of staff, youth, and parents and so forth, you know, a big question that comes back is, you know, this information is great and appreciated, but from a practical place, it would have been really good to sort of know this, you know, earlier on during the time where we could have actually done something about it, acted on it, made a difference during the sort of the window of time we had together with our youth in program itself. So the conversations like that, in terms of just acting on feedback, listening to your youth, listening to your stakeholders, it really led to an evolution in our process in terms of how, but also when we sort of act on, when it's been determined that it's been really important to act on information. So, you know, when, you know, we talk about doing pre-surveys in terms of, so let's use the outcome measure as leadership for, you know, something that's important to a youth, you know, to a leaders in training program. You know, when we, you know, our pre-survey involves a leadership measure that looks at sort of a few domains of leadership as an outcome, from understanding yourself and your own leadership strengths, to communication and working with others in groups, to, you know, to decision making and critical thinking. And so it has a few sort of domains sort of built in it. And so at the start of the, you know, in recent years, as we've evolved both the program as well as the sort of the youth sort of engaged evaluation strategy, you know, we've sort of taken, you know, the time to look at those, you know, what we call baseline insights, you know, from midstream, from the jump, you know, in terms of these are the strengths as it relates to leadership that young people are telling us who are coming into the program. And we can, you know, we can, and to sort of have them and have youth mentors and staff be part of the experience of interpreting them, understanding, you know, what are the strengths coming in, what are the areas for growth and improvement. It gives, you know, in an 8-week program, if you time your analysis right, it gives a good 3/4 of that program to, you know, to reinforce and refine, build off existing strengths if you have a strength-based model, you know, reframe and sort of reinforce parts of your activity plan or your program plan to build up the assets in areas that that may not have scored as high at post. And, you know, it has a reinforcing effect at the organizational level, to tie it back to the bigger picture question of sort of, you know, what are the benefits to youth, what are the benefits to the organization. At the organizational level, you know, it's led internally to a lot of different you know, strength and improvements of the outcomes that we've defined in our sort of theory of change as vital to sort of why we're doing this. But on the youth side, you know, the pace of activity, the seeing visible action based on the feedback that they're sharing, and the, you know, the recommendations that they are making, seeing those changes happen in real time or as close to real time as possible, it has such a reinforcing effect, you know, and a motivational effect to continue to engage in data collection, in evaluation, and in the whole cycle of what we're doing. You know, I think, you know, for a lot of organizations who work with youth, typically trying something for the first time is usually, you know, you can often get some reasonable buy-in for, but to get people sort of coming back, to continue to having buy-in over time, to be part of sort of the fabric and the cycle of what you're doing. I think for us, you know, a huge lesson learned is really that, you know, it's one thing to kind of engage and connect and collect, but a key driver sort of, you know, effectiveness, you know, long-term is are in the eyes and experiences of youth, are they seeing, the feedback they give, going somewhere? And to quickly touch on sort of the, the tail end here in terms of external reporting and sharing, we're at a place right now where sort of, through tools like Scoreboard that Marika mentioned, in terms of, helping connect and engage online, it's been a vital digital bridge for COVID. We're in the process of actively sort of writing up a case study for publication based on sort of the LIT model, how it's transitioned to a virtual space in light of COVID-19. And, and youth mentors who have been part of the delivery of this program are invited to be part of the writing team here, and to really kind of be part of not just the experience of itself, but to be able to get credit for sort of any sort of public documentation and reports that are emerging from what we do.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Brian. And I think that speaks to that importance of capacity building, right? All those valuable skills that youth can learn throughout this process, and being involved in all of those unique opportunities helps to continue to add tools to their toolbox that they can use, and not only within the program and within your organization, but obviously beyond, and I think looks to some of your outcomes, right? When we think about readiness for school, readiness for work, that they can then have those important skills that they can apply and transfer beyond the context that they're learning that. So just kind of adds that value added, more so than just program participation, right? Excellent. Thanks so much for sharing that. Okay, so I think, yeah, we are gonna take a minute and maybe just summarize some of our thoughts, some of our main take homes from all the work that you guys have been doing over the past couple of years, taking some time to reflect and maybe provide the organizations and the different stakeholders that are on our webinar today, just with some main take homes and lessons learned that you found to be really helpful in terms of meaningfully engaging youth within that evaluation process.
Thanks, Corliss, and Marika and I will tag team this one. And to kick it off, I think our short list of sort of top line lessons learned or insights. Living your values. Youth first always has been something that we have defined and sort of planted a flag on, in terms of our approach, and having that sort of live, within how you approach the decisions you make. Just always being mindful that we are in this for who we serve, whether you're a youth, whether you're an adult ally, whether you're a parent or another stakeholder, we are in this together. But ultimately our purpose is to serve youth first. And to that extent, and part of our operationalizing that means that if we are here to serve somebody else, we have to be humble. We have to believe in what we're doing, but we have to be humble enough to know that we don't always have the answers. We have to, be comfortable and in letting them sort of guide us and meeting them wherever they are.
Thanks, Brian. And yeah, the mission measurement model that I shared really does encapsulate a lot of our key learnings about doing evaluation in a youth sport context, but learnings that are transferable to any youth context. So really would encourage you to think about what involvement looks like for your organization. And this bleeds a little bit into the point around culture, but our culture at MLSE LaunchPad has the look and feel of sport, because that's what we know, that's what we love, that's what we do. So evaluation is highly gamified, competitive. We use a leaderboard. You can earn badges like in sports. We offer challenges. We assess skills in a combine setting. So, think about what that type of involvement would look like in your organization, and how that would show up in terms of evaluation.
Yeah, sorry, I was just muted there. To piggyback off Marika's point there, I also want to give a call out to Marika's background on today's call, which gives you a nice sort of visual of MLSE LaunchPad and sort of the inside of our space and our facility for those who haven't had an opportunity to sort of see it up close. But when we talk about culture and kind of understanding sort of who you are and your own identity and what that looks like, from the youth perspective itself, the lesson that I want to call out here is that to recognize that, evaluation activities are part of a larger continuum of their experience. Whether they're from the moment they walk in the doors or are outreach to, from the time they sign up to a program, explain sort of the rules of the road start. I think, when we talk about youth first always, and it's about being mindful of the perspective of young people, and that evaluation is, if you're further along on that continuum, it's not something that exists on the side somewhere else, where you sort of run a program and then you sort of, you try and get a survey collection that's not really connected to everything else. The more you can integrate and bake evaluation activities within the totality of what you're doing, and so it becomes part of the fabric of the program itself. It's it will, our experience has shown that it sort of leads to a longer runway of engagement and benefits and outcomes.
Yeah, and to this next point around meeting youth where they are at, not being dogmatic or sticking to one way of collecting data. Like, I emphasized earlier, we do a lot of online data collection, but earlier in the pandemic, and then again with, recently having to close our facility again, we made hundreds of phone calls because our youth are feeling isolated and they're needing that connection. So, the evaluation is an intervention as well as a form of data collection. We're doing a program evaluation coming up where we'll be doing walking focus groups through the facility to get feedback on elements of the physical space. So really being flexible and responding to what you're hearing from the youth about the best way to engage.
Thanks. And the last tip for us is, is act on the feedback and the evidence that you have. Working with young people is a humbling exercise. Things that we find cool and interactive, get out of date real fast. So in terms of keeping them fresh and current, meet them where they are, but if they give you feedback, if they give you the privilege of sharing information and data, act on it and let them know you're acting on it. It has such a powerful reinforcing effect. It's the compound interest of research and evaluation.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Brian and Marika. Okay, I'll just spend, I know we're getting into our Q&A time, so I'll spend just a quick minute going over maybe some lessons learned from my work with community organizations at YouthREX and wearing my research hat as well. So I think a big piece that I've already spoken about a bit is making sure that we're involving youth from the start and creating that evaluation plan together and talking about that collective vision for your evaluation journey. So again, the earlier that you can engage youth, even if that's before planning your evaluation and it's maybe around program planning, program implementation, the more involvement you can engage, have youth involved in it, the better. And then they're driven by youth insights, youth experiences, youth values, and ultimately you'll likely have to do less in terms of adaptation and program improvement if you have youth voice from the outset that are grounded in those values and how you're actually delivering and structuring your program. The next thing is don't assume that youth are coming in to this process with all the necessary skills to carry out the evaluation. So thinking about how formal training might also need to be provided as needed to make sure that youth actually have the skills to carry out what's required as part of engaging them in that process. So for example, thinking about communication skills or technical skills, or how do you actually facilitate a focus group or analyze qualitative or quantitative data. So I think there's a lot of different training and capacity building opportunities that are out there that youth can engage in. And maybe you don't have capacity within your organization, but I think there's a lot of different great organizations out there, Tamarack being one of them. YouthREX also provides a lot of great capacity building opportunities that are free. And I will absolutely maybe showcase a couple of those at the end of this webinar. And we do give preference to youth that actually apply for these learning opportunities because we know that there's such a need for this. So definitely something to kind of keep in mind. And then I mentioned it a little bit earlier is fostering motivation is so important. So in working with a lot of community organizations, having that milestone that youth can actually work towards, like a knowledge translation event, a conference presentation, a video knowledge product, maybe a presentation to the board, a lot of different creative ways that would probably open up a whole nother webinar that we can do on creative ways to communicate your evaluation findings, but thinking about different ways that you can engage youth throughout that process helps them to focus their energy and maintain momentum, because we know that evaluation is sometimes that time-consuming process. And then one of the things that I do often in many of the programs that I work with, not just with youth-focused programs, but when you do go and present your findings to the board, to donors at a conference, who better than to hear from than the actual people that have lived experience in the program. They don't want to hear from me as an outsider talking about what these other people learned in the program. I often bring adults, program staff, youth who have actually engaged in the program and get raving reviews that, hey, we actually heard and learned from those firsthand insights of those individuals that have those lived experiences. So definitely something to kind of keep that mind together. So maybe I'll jump down to that last one of just listening. Always listen more, listen throughout the entire process. Youth are not afraid to be honest, and tell you what they think. So listen to their triumphs, listen to their questions that they have, listen to the areas of struggle. And the whole point of meaningfully engaging youth is to be that ally, right? So being there to support them throughout that process, so that they can develop those important life skills, and then also kind of having that evaluation of your evaluation of what went well, but what can we improve on? Did that work for you? How can we continue to support you throughout this process? So again, I think keeping those ears open are always so important to do. All right, Pamela, I think I'll pass that over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the three of you. This has been such a fantastic opportunity, I feel, for myself, just to be here and hear what you have to share around the framework that you shared. I love the pre-evaluate, like the pre-planning to the legacy framework. I think it's fantastic. And also just really the spectrum and, you know, the amount of self-reflection that goes into the planning of evaluation is so important for organizations. So I think this is just, these are great tools. And also to Marika and Brian for your great examples, and the framework that you're developing and the tools that you're sharing have been really informative. And I think just a reminder to everyone before I pass it over to Tricia, we will be sharing a recording of the webinar following as follow-up in the next couple of days, along with resources and probably some tool suggestions as well. So please keep your eye on your email boxes. Tricia, I'm going to pass it over to you so we get some time for questions. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you, Pamela, and thank you to our panelists for some excellent presentations. We are running low on time, so if you have any burning questions, please insert them in the Q&A box on your control panel, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. I think we have time for about 2. Let's see how many we can go through. One popular question has been around the no neutral option. So a couple of our participants, they want to know the decision-making process around this, and if you have any practical examples.
Yeah, for sure. And happy to let others jump in too. So this is an evidence-based as well as a practice-informed decision where, you know, we started to think that this was maybe a good idea, started to look into the literature around different types of Likert scales, and found some evidence supporting our instinct to move towards, you know, 6-point and 4-point scales. We were also hearing from our youth that if you give me that middle option, I'm just going to go, you know, C, or 3, 3, 3. We'll just run through the survey, sort of collecting. It's sort of the easy out that doesn't really make you think that hard about what you're seeing. And I'll give a couple of examples. So the scale that we use to measure resilience, the Child and Youth Resilience Measure, the first item on that scale, I have people I look up to. So to say I don't know on that is, you can see how that is just a bit sort of not taking a stance or not really thinking about the answer. So you may immediately not know when you look at that question. You may say, oh, well, I don't know if I have people I look up to. But if you think about that, you know if you have people you look up to or not. Another example from one of the scales that Brian referenced, the LaunchPad Leadership Scale. You know, one of the items on that scale, I set goals and I work towards them. So, you know, if you give that item some thought, you will know if you do or if you don't. It's not something that you really don't know the answer to. And we found that to be the case. If a member, or, you know, we call them members, if a youth really does not know the answer and is not able to know the answer to a question that you're asking, you really need to look at the tool and the quality of the tool that you're using, and perhaps improve the way that you're asking the questions, because a youth should be able to know, you know, the answer to what you're asking. It's not a quiz with like knowledge or information that they may not have access to, because that information comes from inside them.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that, Marika. Another big question that's coming up is, how are you addressing barriers when it comes to engaging youth, whether it's regards to accessing youth in rural settings, owing to transportation barriers, or even because of COVID? Any practical tips for our viewers? Corliss, it looks like you're saying something.
Yeah, I can jump in first, but I think Marika and Brian also might have some valuable insight just to share in terms of the use of technology that they have already done that. But I think trying to eliminate those barriers as best you can. And I think there's different ways and resources that you can go about doing that, whether it's access, transportation, being rural. I know some things that we did working with Boys and Girls Club was we often youth, what time the bus came, we had youth not show up to some of our things because of bus schedules and not feeling safe walking in the evening and stuff. So giving bus tokens, trying to eliminate those transportation or accessibility barriers was something that we just tried to work into our budget as being, hey, you know what, this is important to us. So we need to make it a priority that youth are around the table for these important conversations. But I also think we're in the age of technology now. As of everybody has Zoom, everybody has access to different platforms, they're free. I think it's an excuse to not be able to engage youth through different ways. Thinking about if it's not, if it's access to digital opportunities, then there, you know, that there's that opportunity for a telephone call in, different things that we can be creative and still hear voice from youth through a variety of different ways. And maybe it's not real time, maybe it's not live, but there's different ways that people can provide feedback through chats, platforms, different ways that feedback can be sought.
Thanks, Corliss, and I'll jump in with a couple of sort of other examples here. Although LaunchPad is built into is built in a downtown Toronto sort of urban environment and setting, the we do have one barrier. Transportation barriers is something that we face in a different way than as well. We have some of our programs have parents that will tell us that they they don't feel comfortable or safe sending their kids to sort of walk through certain neighborhoods to get to our space. And we do provide transportation assistance where possible. We've even experimented with things like what we call sort of a walking school bus, where we sort of have youth mentors and staff sort of have pickup points at different schools to kind of bring youth here for after school programs and this and that. I think the piece online is really important though, whether it's, we have, the scoreboard platform, but I think meeting, finding and developing opportunities to take advantage of the online world that we're in is vital. It was important before COVID, and it's a critical digital bridge now. And we do some of the needs assessments with our youth, and our parents tell us that some people, irrespective of where you live, there's a big technology gap and divide across families, across jurisdictions. People, not every family has multiple devices to do all the things that you need to be doing online now. So having opportunities to connect through your phone is really important, depending on the age range of your youth. So we use a model where we've got a program and a sort of a virtual extension through Scoreboard of what LaunchPad is. Everyone's got their own username and password, like any other app. They can log in and sort of and be connected to staff and ourselves. But Zoom, we have programs over Zoom. You have the sort of the meeting version of Zoom. You can drop polls. You can engage the chat. There are different sort of pieces that you can. There are lots of opportunities to sort of collect feedback and timely, and to just bring it back to sort of the minimal. The first capital M of mission is minimal. We don't have to. This doesn't mean long, complicated sort of surveys and scales. We find that, especially like in these times, smaller, bite-sized, quick hits, moments of feedback that is timely and multi-purposeful, and that you can act on, in fairly real time. Those are the kinds of things that really sort of make a stand out in the environment we're in right now. And we'd be happy to kind of be available over email for follow-ups after this session as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian, for sharing that. I know we are at time, so just to follow up on what Brian is saying, we will take all the questions that you've sent to us and we will be answering those as part of the follow-up. So please check your inbox shortly after the webinar. I just want to quickly provide some announcements. So actually, we will pass it to Corliss to provide some announcements from YouthREX.
Absolutely. So just to reiterate what I was talking about before in terms of some various capacity building opportunities at YouthREX, YouthREX has 3 streams, one being knowledge mobilization, one being evaluation leadership, and the last one being capacity building. So I'm going to focus on 2 free capacity building opportunities that we have available. Applications for both of these open in mid-November. I do want to highlight that I know we have a national or perhaps international audience here. I know there's some people from across Canada and the US. So even though this is a Ontario focus, I would still encourage you to apply. We do accept applications from outside of Ontario. So we have this free 10-week online certificate that kind of details the main concepts and approaches of evaluation. So if somebody within your organization, including a youth, might be interested, I would encourage you to apply for that. And then the second one is, I'm jumping all over, sorry. The second one there is a 4-week, again, free certificate on how you can use spreadsheets in program evaluation. So specifically looking at how you can manage, analyze, and visualize your quantitative data for program evaluation. So if you're interested, please stay. You can register through YouthREX.com for our newsletter, and that will help you stay informed about all of these different offerings, but you can also apply as well when we open the applications in November.
Excellent. Thank you, Corliss. We have one final message from Tamarack. So coming up this December, we have a virtual workshop, and it's designed for youth-serving organizations like many of you on the call. So join us to learn about youth-centered community development approaches, gain tools for precipitating youth-led action, and identify how to build a framework for place-based community building. Perfect. So thank you all for attending today and for your thoughtful questions. In a few days, you'll be receiving a follow-up email. So again, please be on the lookout for that. And we will include a link to today's webinar, a recording, a copy of the slides, any links and resources, as well as all the learning opportunities that were mentioned today. You can email Rute, who will be sending the email and has been providing incredible support today. You can reach out to her to provide feedback about today's webinar, and we are always hoping to improve the experience, so please let us know. Thank you again for joining us and have an excellent day. Thank you to our panelists as well for your excellent presentations.